My husband told me that my computer is like, I have to be gentle with it. So I'm like, trying to not touch it very much, which is tough when you have a presentation. All right, questions, comments, concerns before we get going? Or you just want to jump into it? How's life treating us on this wonderful Monday? Oh. All right. I'm also kind of in the middle of the living room right now because this is where we got it to work. So if you hear background noises, I apologize, but I'm not in my office. So hey, it is what it is. Okay, here we go. Let's do it. Cholesterol. So the first thing is we're going to talk about what it is, and then we're going to talk about where the attack on cholesterol came from. Then we're going to talk about a little bit when to worry. Okay, and then what to eat if you are concerned about your cholesterol. As always, feel free to jump in with questions. If you have questions at any point in time, you can put, I'm seeing the chat. There is a delay. I don't remember how long, was it like 20 seconds delay? So if you're watching on Facebook, then there is a bit of delay. So hopefully I won't miss your question. Or, you know, unmute yourself on Zoom and say what you need to say. That's fine, totally interactive. Here we go. What is it? Let's see, the delay. Oh, it's very short. Oh, okay, good. All right. Thank you, Victoria. So what is it? Cholesterol is a waxy fat-like substance. It's produced in our liver and it's carried in our bloodstream as lipoproteins. So because our blood is a water base and these cholesterols are fat based, like, you know, oil and water, they don't mix, right? So to get things where they need to be, we have to wrap these waxy-like substances in proteins, these little lipoproteins, so they can't, they're basically carriers, right? So they just wrap them up in these little carriers and they can get them throughout the body. The one thing that I want to be very clear is that we produce ourselves, our body produces the majority of the cholesterol in our body. Okay? It does that because it needs it, okay? So there was this whole spiel for a long time, for years, that dietary cholesterol was a problem. And that is simply false, okay? Eating cholesterol does not impact our cholesterol levels. What happens is our body needs a certain level of cholesterol. We'll get here in just a second about what we need it for. But our body requires a certain level of cholesterol to function in so many different ways. Cholesterol is vital. We would die without it. So if we're not ingesting it, our body makes it. Okay? And if we do start ingesting it, then our body just makes less to compensate. Okay? But the majority of the cholesterol that we eat, we just poop away. Right? Most of the cholesterol in our body is made in our liver. Okay? Oh, why did we go backwards? Okay, so yeah, so contrary to popular belief, the majority of our cholesterol is made by our body. And you'd be like, well, why? Because we've been told that cholesterol is somehow bad, right? So why would our body make it? Yeah, no, we make it because it's totally necessary for us to live. We can't live without cholesterol. In fact, if people have low levels of cholesterol, there's big concerns there about things like autoimmune diseases. If you have low cholesterol, there's often that's connected with memory loss or poor memory. Okay, so cholesterol is incredibly important to our bodies. What does it do? Well, it's essential in maintaining our sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone. It's important with cell reparation to repair cells. It's necessary to help with bile so that we can digest and emulsify fats. It's in every single cell in our body. It's part of the structure of the walls. It's required to synthesize vitamin D, and perhaps maybe the most surprising, I'm not sure, is it's 100% required for our brain to do any neurotransmission. Okay, we need it in our brain. The highest concentration of cholesterol is in our brain. Okay, we cannot fire without cholesterol. It's very important to nerves. It's very important to memory. It's very important to protecting what's going on in our brain. We have to have it. Okay, and without it, we would die. It's an essential thing in our body. So, like I said, dietary cholesterol, the stuff that we eat, actually plays a very little role in our total cholesterol numbers. So that whole like come in at eggs, for example, because eggs contain a lot of cholesterol. I know that eggs have been back and forth. Are they good or are they not? Well, the reason that people were saying they weren't good is because they contain a lot of cholesterol. Turns out, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Okay? We eat cholesterol and our body just compensates for it by making less. And if we're not eating enough, then our body can make it in our liver. Okay, so here's what happened. In the 1950s, our dear President Eisenhower had a heart attack. And at that point, heart health became a leading concern in the USA. Everybody wanted to know what led to heart attacks, and it kind of shot to the forefront of the medical field because we needed to figure out what was going on. This became a big deal to the American people. And because of that, we had two competing theories come out. And the competing theory that came out of that was something that was backed by this man, Ansel Keys. Okay. And Ansel Keys came out with this, they call it the 7-country study. And basically what he showed is that there was a very high correlation between high cholesterol and heart disease. Okay. Now, here's the problem with this study. Okay, I'm gonna like make a big deal about the 7-country study because this is what got the ball rolling for all of the changes and perspectives that we had with cholesterol for so many years. Okay, now this 7-country study, the way it was published, absolutely did show, or appeared to show that there was evidence that cholesterol was causing heart disease, or rather it was highly correlated. Like we know correlation is not causation. So there was this high correlation between the two. Here's the problem with the 7-country study that we have based all of our recommendations on, is that it was a total sham. It was terrible science. He actually had 22 countries studied in that in his study, and he chose the 7 that fit his hypothesis. Okay, he cherry picked his data real hard because he had already been on this idea that cholesterol was a problem. Okay, and then Eisenhower had a heart attack. That was his in. He knew that this was his way to shoot up to the top, to say, yes, this is going to be like my shot to stardom or whatever. And he cherry picked the data. If you look at all 22, now there's been a lot of analyses after the fact on this study. It has been shown to be total sham. Okay, if you look at all 22, there's no correlation. But he cherry picked the 7 that fit his hypothesis and ran with it. Okay. And unfortunately, yes, terrible, giving science a bad name. He is a terrible scientist. And not only that, I mean, if you read about Ansel Keys, he's also very mean. He was very egotistical. Like there are some stories about this man. And unfortunately, he is one of the biggest influences on our nutrition, even today. Like we're still unraveling the damage that this man's studies had on this country, okay? This being one of the biggest problems. So we took it and we said, oh, well, Ansel Keys is saying cholesterol is a problem, okay? So he came out with this high cholesterol heart hypothesis and basically simplified it, said dietary fats leads to high cholesterol, and high cholesterol leads to damage to the arteries, and all of that damage leads to heart attacks. And from a kind of subjective perspective, that's totally believable. Okay, that you can easily follow that logic, like, oh yeah, that makes sense. If fat's going to raise the cholesterol and then that's going to cause, okay, yeah, that makes sense, right? And so it was really, really kind of easy to convince the public and to convince the American government that this was the problem, high cholesterol. Okay, this sparked this huge low fat era, low fat everywhere, low cholesterol, low fat, low everything. You don't want to eat the cholesterol because that's, you know, upping your cholesterol levels, and you don't want to eat the fat because that ups your cholesterol. And all of a sudden we started seeing low fat everything. Okay. Well, huge problems with this. yeah, so cholesterol became public enemy number one. It was blamed for atherosclerosis, which is the hardening of the arteries for our artery walls. And we just started directing lower cholesterol, okay, at all costs. Whatever you got to do, you got to lower cholesterol because that's the problem. Okay? And to be fair to the American public's credit, like we followed suit. Right? We bought it. Hook, line, science said cholesterol is bad. I will not eat it. I will not, I'm not going to eat the fats because that impacts it. Okay. So we actually did a really good job at following the science, which is a little bit laughable right now. I'm just going to throw that out there. Not that I want to bring politics into anything right now, but we did a good job. We did a good job at following the science. The problem is that this was a huge mistake. A huge mistake. We were basing all of these changes on a study that wasn't sound. And furthermore, the complementary studies, the studies that kind of gave way to this huge cholesterol heart hypothesis in the first place, those studies were done on rabbits. Okay, wonderful. So we did some studies on how cholesterol impacts rabbits. And when we did that, we found that it did indeed cause buildup or plaque in their veins, in their arteries. Now, here's the problem with that, okay? We're basing our recommendations omnivores, yeah? Like we eat meat and vegetables, we eat all sorts of things. Our bodies have been developed to process all sorts of things, including cholesterol. So much so that our body makes its own cholesterol. Rabbits are herbivores. Guess what rabbits don't actually need? Cholesterol. So we are basing our recommendations on a study that was not sound, cherry-picked data, and results from rabbits. What? Right, so at this point, I hope you are all like just kind of scratching your head a bit, like what are we doing? And again, when they came out, it seemed totally reasonable. It seemed like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Look at the impact it's having on these poor rabbits. Yeah, it's clogging arteries, things are going awry. Yeah, but we're not rabbits. We're not herbivores. Our bodies are designed to do something totally different. So it just was like an apples to oranges comparison. It didn't make any sense to do that. And yet we had already bought this hook, line, sinker. We were going to lower cholesterols. Okay, so this is what happened. We did it. So this is about the 1950s. So remember, his heart attack happened in, I think, 1955. Ansel Keys came out with this hypothesis in the late 1950s, maybe 1956. American public took it and said, yeah, cool, we're going to lower cholesterol. And they did it. Look, here's the data. We did it. Fabulous. Okay. Here is the leading causes of death. This is heart disease. Okay, so if you look at that same, I should have maybe cut this off so it started about the same. If you look at the same 1950s to early 2000s, you'll see that we had a bit of a rise in heart disease. It is dropping. It's no longer the number one, I don't believe. I think cancer is now the number one leading cause of death. Well, I bet COVID is now. I don't know, honestly, I haven't looked at them. But it was still the number one leading cause. And so you see like, oh, look, it looks like it maybe had a positive impact. Well, you have to be a little bit careful with the way that you read this data, as you do any data. So you're seeing that there's a little bit of a drop in our heart disease rates, or rather death due to heart disease. But you also have to understand that, that survival rates are also improving because of technology. Okay, so there's a little bit of things to take into consideration when you're looking at this, but do notice that, yeah, okay, perfect. It looks like maybe our deaths due to heart disease have decreased, okay? But if you look at that same period for obesity and extreme obesity, okay, when we started saying no fats, lower cholesterol, you start seeing this rise in obesity. Okay, this is that same period about, late 1950s, 1960s to early 2000s. Okay, so we're seeing an increase in obesity and extreme obesity. Okay, and diabetes skyrocketed. Okay, this is that same period. Okay, so it's like kudos. You did such a good job, American population. You lowered your cholesterol, and yet heart disease was still the #1 cause of death. Obesity rates have increased, and diabetes have increased. Have we really done ourselves any favors? I'm guessing you can answer that. So, okay, so things went terribly awry, right? Now we've had so many studies. So a meta-analysis is an analysis of where you take studies and you analyze them all together to see if you can get an overwhelming trend. Okay, so you take like all the studies on cholesterol, you put them all together and you analyze them as one big analysis to see what the trends are showing. And what we know now, and it's fairly well understood, is that total cholesterol is a very poor indicator of heart health. It actually, in the absence of any other markers, it doesn't tell you anything about overall health. Okay, and this I found interesting. A recent study comparing average cholesterol levels across several countries. Switzerland had the highest average cholesterol at 250, but the lowest occurrence of heart disease. Okay. The other thing I want to show you is that before, when we were arguably a healthier nation back in the 1950s, look at our average cholesterols were about 220. Okay. What they recommend now, and I'm talking about total cholesterol here, are back in the 1950s, it's about 220 there. Okay, arguably a healthier nation. Okay, then shit hit the fan. And then we decided low cholesterol was the way to go. We followed suit. We got sicker as a nation. And then this recommendation came out that we want our total cholesterol to be under 200. Okay. Here's the problem with that recommendation. That recommendation was made in the 1980s, first of all, after we had already had a war on cholesterol. And we had already declared cholesterol to be an issue. It wasn't made based off of any like health markers from historical relevancies or anything. It was based on data in the 1980s. Somehow 200 made sense. It's arbitrary. It's an arbitrary marker. So total cholesterol is useless. It's a useless marker for health. Okay. So we should be questioning things a little bit right now. Like, wait, what happened here? What happened? How did things go so wrong? Okay, then statins. Statins came in 1980. So this is what I'm saying. We bought this hook, line, and sinker, right? We decided that low cholesterol was the way to get to better heart health, and they created a drug, there's statins, and it artificially lowers cholesterol. Now, I haven't talked about one of the reasons why cholesterol is present in our body. Like we know it's important for neurotransmission. It's really important for brains. Okay, it's really important for sex hormones. We need it to synthesize vitamin D. But because it's found in every single cell, and because it's part of the structure of a cell and it can be used to repair cells, okay, one of the things that we see is that in the presence of heightened inflammation, our body sends cholesterol to help repair. It's a cell reparation. So basically what we did with statins, okay, what we did with statins is we're turning off the alarm without addressing at all why the alarm is going off. Does that make sense? So our body, there's something going on. Our body releases cholesterol to go fix it. And instead of trying to figure out what's going wrong with the body, we're just turning off the cholesterol. We're saying, no, we're good. I don't need your help. We're fine. Okay. We are artificially turning off alarms without going to the root cause. Now, statins in general, and there is a small population that are genetically predisposed to having to having high cholesterol. Okay, so there are genetics that are at play here that maybe should be addressed as well. So some people are naturally predisposed to having higher level of cholesterol. So there is room in this world for statins. But when we use them to artificially lower statins without cholesterol, without understanding why it's there in the first place, we are causing a lot more harm because we're not addressing the problem. We're just shutting off the alarm. Does that make sense? How are we doing? I haven't really stopped for questions, but you're always welcome to jump in here. Statins were introduced into about the 1980s, and unfortunately, I don't really see them going away anytime soon because they're a huge moneymaker, and it's easier. I think it's easier for people to just try to take a pill than to address the underlying issue. You know, sometimes we just find peace in having good numbers, whatever that means. We'll talk about good numbers here in just a minute, okay? Without trying to actually address why things are going out of whack in the first place, right? So the one thing that I would say that is, if you are on a statin, or if you're faced with taking a statin, really start to look at why your numbers are elevated so you can actually address the health issues instead of artificially turning off the alarms. Because cholesterol is really, I call them the unsung hero, because they are really here to save the day. We need them. Okay? So we shouldn't be shutting them off. If they're there, there's a reason they're there. Okay. Okay. So it's useless. So like in the absence of any other indicators like high blood pressure or high blood sugar, high stress, a high total cholesterol is actually totally fine. Okay. Total cholesterol is useless. So then what matters? Let's go through the different components of cholesterol. I'm not going to do all of them because there's actually quite a few of them. I'm going to do the ones that most people relate to or at least have heard of. Okay. So what we know what cholesterol kind of is. We kind of have an idea of what it does in our body. But there are different types of cholesterol in our body that do different things. Okay. So let's talk about that. What different types are there? So HDL. This is just a high density lipoprotein. And remember, what happens is cholesterol is waxy, so it can't move through our blood. And so we wrap them in proteins, right? So this just carries, this is what people have deemed the good cholesterol, right? This is like, you want high HDL numbers. They're the big fluffy ones. What they do is they go through our blood and they pick up the extra cholesterol and they send them off to be pooped out. That's what they do. They're good. They're just there to clean things up. If we've got too much cholesterol, it wants to pick it up and poop it out. That's what we want. That's good cholesterol, okay? Then we have what is called LDL. And LDL has been kind of demonized. This is what people call the bad cholesterol, okay? But here's the thing about that. Everybody loves the maid. Yeah, everybody loves the maid. Yeah, I like it. Thanks, Victoria. So LDL is, like we said, it's been deemed like the bad cholesterol. And this is a total and complete oversimplification. Okay? In and of itself, it's not bad. We have different kinds of LDL. We have pattern A LDL, and this is a fluffier kind. It's smaller than HDL, but it's still kind of fluffy. And it's not at all associated with heightened risk of that hardening of our arteries. Okay? And we need LDL to carry our cholesterol and our trigs. Trigs are those energy components from fat. So we need them to carry the trigs and the fat soluble vitamins to all of our cells. Okay. Remember, they're just carriers, right? These cholesterol things are just kind of carrying things around our body. HDL picks up the extra stuff and poops it out. LDL is delivering energy and vitamins to our cells. Okay. It's not bad in and of itself. But we also have something called pattern B LDL, and that's even smaller than pattern A. And pattern B is a little unstable, and it's associated with larger risks for atherosclerosis, which is the hardening of the veins. So pattern A LDL, totally fine. Pattern B LDL, that's cause for concern. Now, here's the thing, is that when we do general lipid panels, if you don't get a specialized lipid order, they're called advanced lipid panels, they don't separate out your LDL. You get an LDL number and that is it. You have no idea. Is this pattern A, which is totally fine? I want pattern A, or is this pattern B? Should I be concerned? You have no idea. Okay. So when you're looking at your total LDL number, it is also useless on its own. It doesn't, if you don't know what kind it is, then you have no idea if you have reason to be concerned. It's useless. So total cholesterol, not connected to general health. Total LDL, not connected to general health. If you don't know which one's which, it doesn't, you can have high LDL, but it's pattern A and be totally fine. Okay. So these pictures like this one where it says HDL is good and LDL is bad, they're misleading. Be careful, okay? Because we need pattern A. We want pattern A. We need vitamins to be delivered to our cells. And without these pattern A LDLs, it won't happen. Okay? And pattern B actually delivers things to our cells too. Okay? They're just smaller. And we'll get into where they come from here in just a minute. But pattern B, why is pattern B a problem? Because they're tiny. Okay, so what happens is that these little tiny LDL particles, they get taken into our cells less often because our cells are less receptive to the tiny ones. So that means they hang out in our blood a little bit longer than our HDL and our ALDL. And because they're so small, if we have any inflammation in our arteries, if we have any disruption to the cell lining in our artery walls, what that little VLDL does is it gets itself right up in that little inflammation and it gets stuck. Okay, so ALDL, fabulous. VLDL, it's getting stuck in things it shouldn't get stuck in. How we doing? Questions? Okay. All right. So the high LDL numbers, they can be problematic if they're consisting of these B patterns, which you wouldn't know unless you had the knowledge to ask for an advanced lipid panel. Okay, these are not standard tests that most doctors run. They run what they run is your lipid panel, the standard one, and then they just tell you like, oh, your LDL is high, you might want to work on that, or oh, your total cholesterol is high, here's a statin. Without really going into detail of what that even means or if it's even a problem. Okay, so if you're really concerned, if you run a standard lipid panel and your numbers are coming up high, ask for an advanced panel. Because if your LDLs are high and they're A, it's fine. You're fine. Your body's doing exactly what it should be doing. It's delivering important vitamins. We're okay. Okay, so LDL, the VLDL, I told you it's a little bit unstable. So what it can do is it can react to chemicals found in our like processed foods, our vegetable our vegetable oils, and then it gets lodged into our weakened arteries, and then it hardens. Okay, so we have to be a little bit careful with that VLDL. Here's the thing, though, is that this wouldn't happen if we didn't have inflammation in the first place. So this is why I get so fired up. Oh, this is why I get so fired up about cholesterol. Because remember that they are sent to places of inflammation to save the day, right? So what happens is that we have heightened inflammation that can be from heightened stress, that can be from overloading our system with sugar, that can be from too much alcohol, it can be from smoking. Okay, there are a lot of reasons why we have chronic inflammation. Well, that chronic inflammation leads to weaknesses in the cell walls. And remember what cholesterol does is it repairs cell walls. So your body says, oh no, the artery is weakened. Release the help, right? So the cholesterol shows up and it's like, here I am to save the day. And then what we find is that we get some plaque built up, and this can be because this VLDL is getting lodged in there. And again, we're going to talk about where this VLDL comes from in just a minute, right? So then we have the series of chain reactions, and then we have heart disease, and then we go in and we look at it, and we see that cholesterol is present. And so we blame cholesterol when cholesterol wasn't the cause at all. How are we doing? There's a common analogy that I love because I think it perfectly demonstrates how we're kind of misassigning our cholesterol. Okay, let's say every time there's a fire and we release firemen to try to go put out the fire, right? So there's a fire, release the firemen. So blaming our cholesterol for heart disease is the same as blaming the firemen for all the fires. Well, I mean, every time I see a fire, there's a fireman here, so fireman must be the cause. Oh, well, every time I see heart disease, there's cholesterol here, so the cholesterol should be the cause. No. Cholesterol is there because there was already a problem. Cholesterol is not the cause of the problem. How are we doing? Our poor cholesterol took a lot of blame for a lot of things it didn't do. Questions, comments, concern, poor livers, poor cholesterol. I know. All it wants to do is help. Okay, all it wants to do is help. Oh man, how's Facebook world? Okay. Oh, sorry, it's not letting me move forward. Okay. So we need to address the inflammation is really one of the takeaways here is that the heart disease is actually linked to inflammation and not necessarily cholesterol. Okay, cholesterol is at the site of the scene because it is there to help, but it's only there because there was already a problem. There's this other thing that's found in the blood. Those are triglycerides, and this is a fat lipid. These are just energy molecules, right? We convert a lot of our excess calories into trigs to use as energy. And if we don't need to use it, we store it and has to get transported in our blood. And so if we have way too much energy than our body needs, then we have elevated trigs in our blood. Okay, so the trigs in and of themselves aren't a problem because we actually need them for energy. That's cholesterol is our lipoproteins are delivering trigs to cells so that they have energy. But the problem is that when we have too much of them, that's when we start getting ourselves in trouble, right? Too much energy, we have too much to store, we have too much in our blood. And there's a correlation between the high level of trigs and BLDL. Remember, BLDL is the LDL that we don't want, okay? So if you're looking at a standard cholesterol panel, the two things that you really want to look at are your trigs, because you can measure trigs on a standard lipid panel. They'll tell you what your trig numbers are, and your HDL. And HDL, remember, is the good fluffy. It removes the cholesterol from the blood. Those are really the two markers that matter on a standard cholesterol panel. Total cholesterol doesn't matter. LDL, total LDL doesn't matter. Because if you don't have a way of distinguishing the difference between ALDL and BLDL, then that is a useless number. However, high BLDL is also associated with high trig LDL, right? There's a correlation there. So what we can do to try to get an idea of if our LDL is BLDL or ALDL is look at our trig number. So if you're looking at your trig to HDL ratio, and we'll do an example here in just a minute. If you're like, I have no idea what's happening, I'll show you like a standard lipid panel here in just a minute. If your trig to ideally you want your trig to HDL level to be around 1 or below. Okay, you want low trigs, high HDL. That's what we want. Low trigs, high HDL. If your trig to HDL ratio is over 2, you might want to start thinking about your diet and what you're ingesting. If your trig to HDL ratio is over 3, you're probably in some trouble. Okay, you've got high BLDL. Okay, you're probably got some damage in your arteries. You might want to do some other tests to take a deeper look into what's going on in there. Okay, high trig to HDL ratios are a much better indicator to heart health than total cholesterol. Okay. How are we doing? Questions? So total cholesterol, we don't care. Total LDL, we don't care. HDL trigs, we care. That's the bottom line. Okay, so here's 2 different panels. These are real life examples. I got them out of the book Cholesterol Clarity, which is an amazing read, by the way, if you're really looking to understand cholesterol better. Cholesterol Clarity really breaks it down beautifully. These are real life panels from 2 different similarly aged women. Okay. Total cholesterol is 299. And again, remember the recommendation is at 200. All right. So if you're going to a general practitioner who isn't really all that informed about cholesterol and how to read panels, then this might be one of those like red flags. Okay. People are put on statins for far less total cholesterol than this. Right. So this might be like, oh dear, I don't know, let's call her Susan. I don't know who their names are. So this might be like an, oh, Susan, look how high your cholesterol is. Like, okay, hold up, not the full story. Okay, HDLs, ideally you want them over 50. If you can get them over 70, you're looking good. Okay, you want those higher. You want them ideally 70 or more. So her HDL numbers are 88. That's fabulous. That's good. We've got high HDLs. That's fabulous. LDL looks high. Again, this might be like, oh dear, we might need to think about statins, but then look at those trigs. That is so beautiful. These trigs are so low. That is, look, and then the trig to HDL, remember the ideal is about 1 or less. This trig to HDL ratio is beautiful. If there's no other biomarkers to indicate any health or heart issues at all, like high blood sugar, high blood pressure, high stress, okay? In the absence of any of that, this is a perfectly healthy woman. She is fine. Beautiful. Keep doing what you're doing. Okay, let's jump over to Rosemary. I don't know, I'm making up names here. So Rosemary has a smaller total cholesterol than, I already forgot, Susan, right? Smaller. So she might look better, but her HDLs are okay. They're 50. We want them at least at 50. So that's okay. Her LDL is 172. So that's even less than Susan's, but her trigs are through the roof. This is a problem. Her trig to HDL ratio is over 5. Something is not right. Okay. So even though if you're looking at total cholesterol, you might think Susan's in trouble, she's actually perfectly healthy. She's good. But we need to figure out what's going on with Rosemary. Her trigs are way too high. Okay, so there's an indicator there that there's probably some dietary adjustments that need to happen so that we can get the trigs down. Questions? Cholesterol. We just got it all wrong, my friend. We looked at the wrong markers for so long. And I think it wasn't even until, so we've known for a while now that like dietary cholesterol doesn't impact our levels very much. But I think the AHA, the American Heart Association, didn't retract their statements on dietary cholesterol until a couple of years ago, like maybe 5 years ago. They finally said, oh yeah, I guess dietary cholesterol, not a big deal. Okay. We got, oh man, so frustrated. Okay, so quick recap. Cholesterol is absolutely necessary for us to live. Total cholesterol is useless. We want our HDL up. We want our LDL down. That's what the caveat, I should have put a star there. We want our BLDL down. The ALDL is good because that's delivering nutrients to our cells. And we want to decrease our trigs, okay? All right, so hopefully by now you're feeling, I don't know, like you can have a little better relationship with cholesterol. Hopefully, you don't think it's the demon that we made it out to be. It's not public enemy number 1, I can assure you. All right, so what do we want to do about it then? Right, what do we do about these cholesterol numbers? Okay. Saturated fats. Let's talk about saturated fats really fast. So saturated fats got wrapped into this mess because saturated fats increase cholesterol. And since cholesterol was demonized and we were trying to lower cholesterol at all costs, even though it was all based on terrible science, saturated fats got wrapped into it. Now, saturated fats absolutely do raise cholesterol. Okay, it does. But here's the kicker. It has the most impact on HDL, which is the good fluffy stuff that carries away the waste, okay? And it has the most impact on ALDL, which is the stuff that's delivering all this beautiful nutrients to our cells. These are the 2 good cholesterols. Okay? It does also raise trigs. I didn't put that down, I should have. It also does raise your trigs numbers, but remember, trigs, when used effectively, are just energy sources. Okay, so having trigs, I mean, you're going to have trigs in your blood regardless. You have to, it's a source of energy. Okay, so raising trigs and using that as energy is fine. It's when we've got too many things running around and we're not using those, we start creating problems. So it does raise your cholesterol, absolutely, but it raises it in a way that makes sense for our bodies, which also makes sense from an evolutionary perspective because we eat saturated fats. Okay, saturated fats come from animal products. We eat animal products, and we always have. So it makes sense that our body knows how to deal with that. Okay, so saturated fats got this terrible reputation, and it still is getting a terrible reputation when it's actually doing the body some good. It's unfortunate the way this whole thing has progressed because these connections were made based on poor science, and it's really hard to unravel that now that it's so entrenched in our medical community. It's oof. Okay, so saturated fats and dietary cholesterol. So eggs and bacon, please don't demonize these things. Okay, they're fine. They're fine. If you're concerned, however, sorry, don't come after my eggs, just like so saturated fats, these are found in animal products, so butter, beef, pork, cheese, coconut. Coconut is, yeah, it's one of the few plant-based products that has saturated fat. Poultry with the skin. Okay, so these are where you can get your saturated fats, which I want to remind you that cholesterol is incredibly important to our hormones. Okay, so if your hormone profile is out of whack, you might want to try to slip in some good healthy fats, right? Try to help support your hormones. If you're concerned though, if you're like, okay, I can buy you on the cholesterol, but I'm a little iffy on the saturated fats, okay, vary your fat sources. You can get really good fats from avocados. You can take off the skin from your poultry. Without the skin, it's pretty low saturated fats. You can get them from the nuts, the almonds, flax seeds. They up your fish. Right? We were designed to eat a varied diet. Okay? So that means varied protein sources and varied fat sources. What these do, your saturated fats and your unsaturated fats from these foods that I've just listed here, they up HDL and LDL. Okay, these have the biggest impacts on our good cholesterol. Okay, but if you want to lower your bad VLDL and your trigs, those are created in response to processed foods, refined grains, simple sugars. Our liver responds to these processed foods by creating VLDL. VLDL is typically dedicated to running trigs around our body. And trigs are just fuel sources. But when we make too much, if you were part of that sugar discussion that we had, our liver converts excess sugar into trigs. Okay? And so to handle those excess trigs, it makes VLDL. And without inflammation, VLDL wouldn't be a problem. But chronic ingestion of refined foods like this creates inflammation. So it's kind of a 1-2 punch. We're creating inflammation, and then we're also creating these little particles, and the little particles get stuck in the inflammation, and then plaque builds up, and then we have heart attacks, and we're left going, what happened? So if you want to decrease your trigs and your VLDL, then decrease the processed foods. Okay. Vegetable oils, like canola oil or peanut oil, Pam, margarine, these are all known to oxidize those VLDL. Remember, I told you VLDL are pretty unstable. Okay. When they get hit with chemicals and these sorts of things, they start oxidizing and they create that like calcium buildup type things. If you come back with cholesterol levels that you're concerned about, the next step that I would recommend you do if you're really concerned about like the impact of this with your arteries and your heart is get something called a CAC scan. And what that does is it scans your arteries for calcium buildup from oxidized VLDL particles. Okay. There is that indicator, your CAC score, is a much more powerful indicator for heart disease than total cholesterol ever could be. Okay. So if you really are concerned, ask your doctor for a CAC scan. Look at the calcium buildup in your arteries. And where is that coming from? It's coming from this oxidized stuff. And that is coming from inflammation and LDL particles and bad oils. Other ways to lower your trigs, stop smoking. That's for inflammation, reduce your alcohol intake, move your body. So one of the ways that we can try to reduce our trigs is to use that energy that's being floated around. So move your, and it doesn't have to be anything intense, just go on like walks. Even a walk is enough to help lower your trigs numbers. Just move in a way that makes you happy. It doesn't have to be like dedicated HIIT or, 5-mile run or a really intense, lift session. Do something fun, go on a walk, go on a bike ride, dance, just move your body a little bit every day. Fiber can really help move things along as well, right? So the fibers in veggies, fruits, hummus, beans, and manage your stress. Okay. The one thing that I do want to say is if you are actively losing weight and you get a cholesterol panel, those numbers will mean nothing. What is happening when you actively lose weight is your fat cells are shrinking and releasing the extra storage in there, and that extra storage is trigs. When you actively lose weight, your trig numbers will skyrocket. It is normal. That is your body's way of removing this extra energy. Okay, so if you are actively losing weight and your doctor orders a lipid panel and it comes back and your trigs are sky high, breathe. If you know that you're in the process of losing weight, that is normal. That's fine. It's part of the process of releasing the energy. Okay, so that's another thing to take into account. If you've had a panel done and you're like, my trigs are skyrocket, but I've been doing so much better and I've been moving my body and I'm losing weight, that's normal then. I would expect to see elevated trig numbers if you're in the process of losing weight. Woo! Questions? How are we doing? Don't hate your cholesterol. Hate why you have to have it there in the first place. Questions, comments, concerns. I'm happy to take. So overwhelmed with knowledge. Need a minute to breathe. Oh, and one thing I did want to say too, like one of the side effects, oh man, I've got so much to say. One of the side effects of statins, by the way, is brain fog and memory loss, right? And that makes perfect sense because we require cholesterol in order to have those things firing up there. So when we artificially lower it, we're gonna have some impact on our brains. That's another thing to say about statins is that we had all of these side effects that we weren't expecting because we didn't recognize how important cholesterol was in our body. So we started artificially lowering it and all of a sudden people are having memory problems. And you're like, well, yeah, you're messing with the neurons. The other thing is that the studies are showing that those who have really good cognitive health in their later years actually have higher cholesterol levels. Why? Because cholesterol is protecting our neurons. Anyway, side note. Questions, comments, concerns? Yes. Okay, all right, if there are no questions, I will let you all go. Thank you for joining me. If you do have questions later on or in the future, please feel free to DM me. I'm more than happy to take those for you. Until next time, eat more, eat well, eat happy.